11. The view of sins as virtues. No study of the doctrine of sin can afford to overlook the extent to which particular sins are viewed by humanism as virtues. The principle of sin is basic to humanism. Every man shall be his own God, determining good and evil for himself. Genesis chapter 3, verse 5. Not surprisingly, particular sins have also been justified. The Middle Ages spoke much about the 7 deadly sins. Although they do not appear in the Bible in such summary fashion, they are clearly seen as sin, with one qualification. The list is as follows: pride, envy, wrath or anger or hate, lechery, covetousness, gluttony, and sloth. Anger is not necessarily a sin. The Bible speaks of the wrath of God and gives examples of holy anger. Perhaps asceticism led to gluttony being given a higher status than other offences, such as sacrilege. At any rate, these sins have gained more than a little respectability since then. Pride and irreligious ambition are now seen as virtues, not sins. At one time, schoolboys memorized Cardinal Wolsey's famous farewell to Cromwell as a routine part of their education, and it was regarded as a great moral statement by Shakespeare concerning the vainglory of pride and ambition. It was, in fact, one of the best-known passages in Shakespeare. Wolsey declares, "Mark but my fall, and that ruined me. Cromwell, I charge thee, fling away ambition. By that sin fell the angels. How can man, then, the image of his Maker, hope to win by it? Love thyself last. Cherish those hearts that hate thee. Corruption wins not more than honesty. Still in thy right hand carry gentle peace, to silence envious tongues. Be just and fear not. Let all the ends thou aimest at be thy countries, thy gods and truths. If thou fallest, O Cromwell, thou fallest a blessed martyr. O Cromwell, Cromwell, had I but served my God with half the zeal I served my king, he would not in mine age have left me naked to mine enemies." On some occasions, when I have quoted these lines, I have had some puzzled responses. Pride and ambition have become such great humanistic virtues that Shakespeare's lines ring falsely in many younger ears. Envy has been institutionalized into a major political force and a virtue. Helmut Schirk, in Envy, 1970, has shown how envy is basic to our modern political motives and is responsible for our social decay. However, few are ready to concede that envy is wrong. Schirk's work has largely fallen on unheeding ears. The same is true of covetousness. Our politics, advertising, and social pressures work to increase covetousness, not to control it. Not only has the sexual revolution justified sexual sins from a humanistic perspective, but theologians, quote, Christian, end quote, psychologists, and pastors have sometimes concurred. Contempt for authority, rebellion, as well as ingratitude and much more, are now justified where these sins further self-promotion and personal gains. Duty is rarely stressed as a virtue. In fact, a sense of duty is seen by too many as foolishness. This brings us to a key aspect of their concurrence. Our purpose here is not to chronicle further the decay in various areas of moral requirements, but rather to come to an understanding of the religious principles thereof. Man is a religious creature. What he does out of a religious motivation. Let us look at this motivation by examining something in the economic realm. all through the post-World War II era until rather recently, at least until circa 1975, there were countless people who approved of inflation. They saw it as a major asset, and they voted for those politicians who favoured inflationary policies. Inflation paid off for them. It cheapened their debts and increased the monetary price of their property, as well as raising their salaries. The common response to those of us who are anti-inflationists and hostile to paper money was simply this: a little inflation is a good thing. It simply needs intelligent controlling to become the greatest possible asset to an economy. It is not my purpose here to go into the economic falsity of this opinion, except to say that to expect inflation to stay small, once started, is like expecting a pregnancy to stay small. A little bit of pregnancy leads either to full pregnancy or to the murder of abortion, and inflation leads either to a runaway inflation or a deflationary collapse. Basic to the idea that a little inflation is a good thing is a belief that a little sin is a good thing and that the sinner can control it. This is the key: controlled sin, with man as master over it, using it for his advantage. Keynes was fully aware of the end results of inflation. All the same, he advocated controlled sinning as economic health or virtue. This concept is very prevalent. It is basic to situation ethics, but also to those who would deny any adherence to situation ethics. Thus, I have had repeated reports of various neo-evangelical pastors and psychologists, not to mention modernist ones, who have counselled, in various situations, a, quote, little adultery, end quote, as a wise and necessary step. The rationale has been that adultery, as a general rule, is unwise and immoral, but in certain circumstances, it can provide a, quote, necessary, end quote, relief to a difficult situation. First, we can grant the often difficult situation, but the governing principle cannot be circumstances, but the law of God. The commandment is, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." Exodus chapter 20, verse 14. In Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 18, the law reads, "Neither shalt thou commit adultery." In both cases, it is an implication and a consequence of this primary and governing declaration: "I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage." Exodus chapter 20, verse 2, Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 6. God's law requires obedience, not because of our advantage, but because God is the Lord. True, there are blessings for obedience and curses for disobedience, but we must say with Job, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him." Job chapter 13, verse 15. The doctrine of controlled sinning, whether present in economics or sexual matters, is humanistic to the core. It presupposes man as the Lord. Man's attitude towards sin is thereby governed by personal advantage, not God's law. Hence, if a little sin, whether in economics, sex, speech, theft, or anything else, is seen as beneficial to man's interests, it is justified and vindicated. In all of this, the presupposition is that man is the Lord and, like God, can make all things, including his sins, work together for good. Compare Romans chapter 8, verse 28. Second, our Lord is clear that not only is man not the Lord over his life, or over sin, but he is rather the slave of sin. Whosoever committeth sin is the servant or slave of sin. John chapter 8, verse 34. The commentators are almost all agreed that our Lord does not refer to a single act of sin, Such a conclusion is arbitrary on their part. They hold that a single act of sin does not enslave, only the continuous commission of sin. Let them argue this point with Adam. His one sin certainly enslaved him. Some would render the first part of John chapter 8, verse 34. Everyone who continues to commit sin is a slave of sin. But sin is in the singular. The reference is not to one who commits sins, but sin. Behind the commission of a particular sin, as with Adam and Eve, is bondage to sin as a principle. Thus, a particular act is the outcome of an inner condition. Before a nation starts inflation, it has already abandoned a sound monetary policy. Before a man commits one act of adultery, he has already decided that adultery is to be preferred to marital fidelity. Moreover, every act of sin involves a decision. Basic to that decision is a principle of lordship. Before the commission of sin, Adam and Eve had decided on their lordship, first, and second, on the advantages of sin for them. They sought to be as God, Genesis chapter 3, verse 5, and they concluded that the fruit of their tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise. Genesis chapter 3, verse 6. After the fall, both pleaded the weakness of the moment and circumstances. Genesis chapter 3, verses 9 to 13. It was, in their eyes, a single act, whereas, in reality, it was their new principle of life and the fabric of their being and action. So too now, men seek to isolate a sin from their lives and being and reduce it to the act of an existential moment and to the pressure of circumstances. This is also an aspect of the doctrine of controlled sinning. Sin is held to be separate from our persons instead of an expression thereof.